class. This is week 2, Intro to Philosophy. And it's your first week with a journal. So your journal topic for this week, and this is a journal topic. This isn't for the discussion board. This is for the journal. And so the journal, remember, is this other kind of ongoing assignment. I'll give you a different topic each week. And you'll be accumulating all of these, and towards the end of the term, you'll turn them all in somehow, right, via email. And so the topics for the journals won't necessarily be what we're talking about in class. The expectation is not that you will include, hey, here's what the person we're talking about in class would say about this. I just want you to think about it. I want you to think about it from multiple sides and multiple perspectives, okay? So the journal for this week is, let's presume there's a machine. Let's call it an experience machine. And you can plug yourself into it and have any experience that you desire, that you wish, okay? And so the question is, would you hook yourself up to this machine? That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question then is, would you hook yourself up to it for the rest of your life? And so what I want you to do, that's the topic. So what I want you to do then is I want you to think from both sides of that. I want you to think, oh yeah, here are all of the reasons that I would hook myself up to this machine. At least, once or twice or temporarily, what have you. Here are the reasons why I would. Here are all the reasons why I wouldn't. Right? And so it's kind of seeing why people would choose the opposite of what you would choose, right? Seeing the validity in their thinking as well, okay? Then the second part then, well, of course I would hook up to it for the rest of my life. Here's all the reasons why. Of course I wouldn't. Here are all of the reasons why, right? And so in a lot of ways this question's getting at, is there a value to actually having the experience itself? Or is it the memories of the experience that are important, which you'd have the memories of the experience? It would be as if you actually had the experience. Or is simulated somehow different than real? Those are the types of questions this journal is getting at, okay? So, on to the lesson for today. So we're done with the background stuff. Now we're moving into the actual philosophers and philosophies, right? One of the reasons I decided to start with human life and its meaning, even though it's at the end of the book, is because I think that the readings are easier to understand than digging into part 1, knowledge and certainty, or reality and being. Those are heavy topics, and not that human life and its meaning is not a heavy topic, but it's probably one that most of you have thought about before, and I think that the writings in this section are a little clearer, because part of the point of these writers is that they're trying to be accessible to everyone, right? Philosophy is not this pie-in-the-sky, highfalutin ivory tower thing yet when these folks are writing. Lucretius, Seneca, Augustine, Montaigne, right? It's not this specialized discipline in academia and all of that yet that's written for other people, right? It's written for everybody. And so I'm going to start with Lucretius, and while we're going through here, you're talking about human life and its meaning. So really related to this then is, what is the good life? What are the aspects of the good life? What are these things that we're striving for, that we're trying to have? And we're in a very interesting time, just coming out of an interesting time, but we're still in the midst of the interesting time as well. Is when I think about the good life, I think, what are the things I'm missing out on if I'm staying at home or sheltering in place or being quarantined? Right? What is it I'm missing out on, if anything? Or do I actually have the good life? If the good life is time with family, I'm getting plenty of that. If the good life is interacting with people, I'm getting that, right? This is an interaction of a sort, right? Or via the Twitter and the Instagrams and all that stuff. Is it actually physically being with other people? Is that the good life? Maybe that's a bit lacking right now. So when you think about the good life, be thinking about the things that perhaps you don't have access to right now, that you miss, or that you think that you would want to have access to. And even before we dig into Lucretius and Seneca and Augustine, the primary focus for this video, hopefully we'll see how long I ramble on about them, I want to bring up a much more modern thinker who some of you may have had exposure to in psychology, Maslow, in Maslow's hierarchy of basic needs. See? So, hierarchy of basic needs, says Maslow, the very bottom, the most fundamental basic need that all of us have is food and water. right? We're living creatures. We cannot live without food and water. So that's our most primal, basic need. Nothing else can happen if we don't have those needs met. Then next level up then, shelter, right? It's a better life if we don't have to sleep out in the rain. We may choose to sleep out in the rain if we're camping or something along those lines, but not being forced to sleep out in the rain. A place that we can call home, a place that we can shelter in place at, right? Friends, the friendship thing, right? And he says that all of these things ultimately lead, and there are a few that I left out here, but these are the basic ones. Right? We have physical needs met, then we have emotional and psychological needs met. And he says all of this stuff ultimately leads to self-actualization. We'll talk plenty about self-actualization in this course, maybe beginning today, but certainly down the road we will. And Maslow's self-actualization is really happiness, whatever that means, right? And so, of course, there may be varied responses to what is happiness, what is the good life. I get that. But I wonder if there are also some universal fundamental agreements on what is the good life, right? If there's some stuff that transcends just personal preference, back to this objective truth, subjective truth stuff, right? If there's stuff that everyone or nearly everyone can agree upon, perhaps then that's an objective truth about the nature, the true nature of the good life, or the fulfilled life, or the meaningful life, the purposeful life. Perhaps then that is related to the meaning of life, right? Human life and its meaning. Okay? So, in addition to talking about Lucretius, I'll also back up slightly and talk a bit about Epicurus. So I'll be referencing our text. This is another text here, The Consolations of Philosophy by Alain de Botton. And de Botton's an interesting fellow. He's British, and he was in the dissertation stage of his PhD in philosophy, and then ditched it. He was like, forget it. I don't need this. To do what I want to do, I don't need this. Because he didn't want to go into academia. For him, philosophy wasn't about going into academia. Philosophy was about reaching the people. And so he then started opening up what he calls schools of life. And so these schools of life are opening all over the world. The first one in London. And there are about a dozen or so of these now. And you can check out the website on the School of Life. Really interesting stuff. And what it is this kind of open access place for everyone to come in and discuss philosophy, life, meaning, purpose, work, relationships, all of this stuff. And so this was his first book, The Consolations of Philosophy. He's written other ones since. He wrote a great one where he just spends a week at Heathrow Airport talking to everybody. It's fantastic. But in this one, and it's interesting, this book is cross-listed as self-help / philosophy. And that's part of de Botton's point, that philosophy should be about helping the self. It should be about self-care and so forth, right? It should be this internal reflection that helps the person live a better life. It's interesting, he chooses 6 philosophers who he thinks can really help us manage some of the issues of life. Nietzsche, whom we'll talk about in this class, Schopenhauer, whom we'll talk about later this week, Montaigne, whom we'll talk about later this week, Socrates, who we'll sort of in passing talk about in a couple of weeks, Epicurus / Lucretius, and Seneca. And so he does a nice job of this is actually his second book. How Proust Can Change Your Life was first, I'm sorry, his second book. But this book does a nice job kind of introducing these philosophies and how they could also be self-help, right? So I'm going to start with Epicurus to lead into what Lucretius is talking about, which is what you read for today. In part what you read for today, hopefully. Okay. And so he starts off, an anomaly, this is de Botton now, and then I'll tell you when I'm quoting Epicurus. An anomaly among an often pleasure-hating and austere fraternity, there was one philosopher who seemed to understand and want to help, right? So philosophy kind of has this, and probably always has, kind of had this stereotype, this, the idea that, it's all about highfalutin thinking and so forth, and not real living. Let's just sit around and think some more, right? And there are some philosophers who run counter to that. Typically, they're kind of grouped into the category known as hedonists, right? They're pleasure seekers. Now, pleasure seeking doesn't just mean physical pleasure, though that is an aspect of it. It does also mean mental pleasure, but primarily it's about seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. very simple things, right? I mean, that's sort of in here, is it not? I mean, when you have food and water, you're more pleased than when you don't. When you don't have food and water, you're in pain, right? In a very simple, fundamental level, right? When you're ill, right, you would probably give up most anything to be healthy again, right? These basic fundamental things. Now, purely being healthy, probably not quite the good life. Purely having food and water, probably not the good life, right? There's probably more to it than that, but it has to at least start there. So, again, Debatten talking about Epicurus, or setting the scene for Epicurus. And so, then he's quoting Epicurus. I don't know how I shall conceive of the good, he wrote, if I take away the pleasures of taste, if I take away sexual pleasure, if I take away the pleasure of hearing, and if I take away the sweet emotions that are caused by the sight of beautiful forms, right? That there's something to physical stuff, right? It's not just food, it's good food, right? Can food fill you up and sustain you and be nutritious? Yeah, but isn't life a little bit better if you occasionally get to have a piece of cake or some ice cream? Now, that stuff all of the time obviously leads to unhealthy, but if you go to a party and there's no cake, no cupcakes, no sweets of any kind, you're like, what kind of party is this? If there's no music, what kind of party is this? Right? If there aren't people talking to one another and having a good time, you're like, what kind of party is this? So maybe those are other aspects of the good life. And so Epicurus then was born in 341 BC, and you can get into his whole history. If you're into that, you can go out and read his biography. But Epicurus says, pleasure is the beginning and the goal of the happy life. It's about pleasure. Now again, not just physical pleasure. Mental pleasure is going to play a role here too, and Lucretius is going to highlight that even a little bit more than Epicurus himself does. But yeah, it's about pleasure. Epicurus then kind of ran away from society, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And he says something very interesting about philosophy itself, and so we're still sort of in that, what is philosophy anyway, sort of piggybacking off of that discussion. A little bit of glare off my forehead. Sorry about that. Epicurus says, just as medicine confers no benefit if it does not drive away physical illness, philosophy is useless if it does not drive away the suffering of the mind. So part of the point of philosophy then is to quench this suffering of the mind, that the mind suffers. It's trying to figure stuff out all the time. It's better to know than to not know. And there's so much stuff we still don't know. And we're trying all the time to figure more out, and that's great. But it also leads to some type of dissatisfaction and some suffering. Philosophy then is put into place. And the point of philosophy, Epicurus says, is to get rid of that suffering, to have a tranquil mind. So here's Lucretius's list of the essential ingredients of pleasure. He says they may be elusive, they're not expensive, so it's not about money. Notice, now you do need to have some money to have food and water. You need to have some money to have shelter. Hopefully you don't need to have money to have friends. Otherwise I would question whether they're actually friends. That would probably be the journal topic for another week. What is a friend? Yeah, probably next week. But don't write that one yet. Okay, don't write that one yet. Here's Epicurus's list. Firstly, friendship. And the good times, it seems, are better when you have someone to share the good times with. Now, sometimes those placards that you can get at like Pier 1 and places like that are sometimes pretty cheesy. Sometimes they're actually kind of true. I saw one the other day, not the other day, forever ago now that I happen to remember the other day, that says, a friend is someone you tell your stories to. A best friend is someone you shared those stories with, right? The experience itself. They were there when the story happened. They weren't there to hear the story. They were there to live it with you, right? So friendship. Quoting Epicurus, of all the things that wisdom provides to help one live one's entire life in happiness, the greatest by far is the possession of friendship. He goes on. Before you eat or drink anything. Remember, that's at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. Food and water are more fundamental, more basic necessities than friendship. I'm not quite sure Epicurus agrees. He says, before you eat or drink anything, consider carefully who you eat or drink with, rather than what you eat or drink. For feeding without a friend is the life of a lion or a wolf, not the life of a human. Aristotle, who would come slightly after Epicurus, around the same time period, generally speaking. Aristotle said we're social animals. We need each other. And not only that, we want to be around other people. Again, think about how difficult the 2-month stay-at-home order was for so many people. And that was just here in Ohio. Think about around the rest of the country or around the rest of the world where it was an actual quarantine. You could not leave your house at all for 60 or more days. Wow. And yeah, this is something. Sure, you can still Facebook Live people and stuff like that, but whew. Like the life of a lion or a wolf. Think about what happens to prisoners put in solitary confinement. They come out psychologically better prepared to deal with everyone else, or psychologically worse equipped to deal with everyone else. Epicurus goes on. So first is friendship. Second, freedom. Again, think about some of the things that you didn't have during the stay-at-home orders. You didn't have freedom to go where you wanted and do what you wanted. You couldn't just go to the store just because you wanted to. Right? There had to be specific reasons why. Only essential businesses were open. You couldn't go to a music store, pick up a guitar and start playing on it just because you wanted to, just because it's fun. So Epicurus and his followers then bought a garden. So they have this garden plot outside the gate of the city where they're growing their own vegetables and stuff, and they basically kind of had a commune. They removed themselves from society. They removed themselves from the rat race. Think again in contemporary terms about how many people, the Back to Earth movement, so on and so forth, kind of attempt to, live off the grid, remove themselves from this rat race thing, remove themselves from the pursuit of money and stuff and materialism and all of that. The minimalist movement is somewhat related to this. Of course, with the garden, then it's also good, healthy food, which helps your mind and so on and so forth, right? The body and mind are connected, blah, blah, blah. Thirdly, then, thought, and that ties into the freedom thing as well. Freedom of thought. You don't have to think what other people tell you to think. You don't have to do what other people tell you to do. You're free to think and do what you want. Within certain parameters, obviously. But for the most part, in this freedom of thought thing, we'll come back to probably the last week of class with Bertrand Russell. Epicurus was especially concerned that he and his friends learned to analyze their anxieties. Epicurus, this is 300 BC. And already, really, he's doing psychology. How do we overcome our anxieties? My wife, the mental health counselor, specializes in trauma, anxiety, depression. Anxiety rates and depression rates are at all-time highs, even prior to the pandemic, and they've only gotten higher since. This is Epicurus. We need to analyze these anxieties. And what are people most anxious about in Epicurus's day? This list, I'm sure, is completely outdated and doesn't apply to any of us today. Epicurus thinks money, illness, death. Thankfully, no one's afraid of those things now, right? No one's anxious or fearful about money or illness or death anymore in 2020. Aren't these the very same things that most people are anxious about now? Right now? Even pre-pandemic, most of this stuff in this current pandemic, yeah. right? Unemployment rates are at an all-time high, and so many other people are thinking, man, my job could be next. And then where's the money going to come from for the food and the water and the shelter? Am I going to get sick? Am I going to die? So he says, what is and is not essential for happiness, things that are natural and necessary: friends, freedom, thought, food, shelter, clothes. Of course, there are nudists who will claim clothes aren't, natural or necessary either. Things that are natural, perhaps for some, but unnecessary for happiness, Epicurus says: a grand house, private baths, banquets, servants, fish, meat. Neither natural nor necessary: power and fame. The thing that even in 2020 many people strive for. Right? So I have kids, I talk to other kids, I have nieces and nephews who come over frequently. I also, through other aspects of my life, I talk to kids and so forth, and I ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? Sometimes I ask them. Frequently I don't, because I don't want to put that pressure on them where they then become anxious about, oh my gosh, how am I going to make money when I get older? No. But occasionally it may just come up in the conversation, right? Or the things that they're interested in. And many of them want to be YouTube influencers, which apparently is a thing. I guess that's a thing. Like, they want to be famous, they want to be powerful, they want to be rich. Now, are there certain opportunities that then gives someone? Sure. But if that's the end of it, again, this isn't Schrappe telling you, hey, money bad. Again, you need money. Without money, I don't have this house with the deck and all that stuff. But to what extent? How much are you willing to sell out, literally? Are you willing to compromise for the money, the fame, the power? But those are good ethical questions that I talked about more in my intro to ethics class, not intro to philosophy. So let's turn to Lucretius. Pick up my book without getting completely off screen here. All right. Because this is the reading I actually had you guys do. All right. So this is Rome. This is 60 BC, give or take. Right. So Lucretius is a follower of Epicurean philosophy. He's a follower of Epicurus. So all that stuff I just talked about, Lucretius is building on that. Right? He's adhering to all of that. And this is just his articulation of it. He's a poet, really. Epicurus more of a philosopher, the way that he wrote. Lucretius more of a poet, the way he writes, which again might be a nice entry point into intro to philosophy if we read more poets than philosophers. As we go, those two may get very muddled, the distinction between them. So let's just dig in here. When the sea's mighty waters are being lashed by the wind, how sweet it is to stand on the shore and watch someone else struggling. Not that one takes pleasure at the afflictions of another, but it is pleasant to realize what troubles you are free from yourself. It's that position of gratitude, that disposition and attitude of, at least I don't have it that bad. Now, it doesn't mean that your pain's not real. Right? I had one of my high school teachers told me once, look, if you break a bone, that's going to hurt. Now, you may not be in the same amount of pain. It may not last as long as someone with cancer. But your broken bone is still a broken bone that actually physically hurts you. And that's okay. It's okay that it hurts. But to put it in perspective, at least it ain't cancer. Right? So there is this perspectival thing going on here. This should help to bring tranquility to the mind, to ease that suffering and ease that anxiety that Lucretius and Epicurus are talking about. I do wonder, other philosophers will disagree with Lucretius on that initial point, though, that one doesn't take pleasure at the afflictions of another. The German word Schadenfreude, which specifically means taking pleasure in someone else's pain. Nietzsche talks about that as well with regards to resentment. And then when I think about that, I think about the distinction between Wipeout, an old TV show, you can probably find it on Hulu or something, Wipeout, and American Ninja Warrior. In Wipeout, you're rooting against the contestants. You hope they fall. Holy moly is sort of like Wipeout plus mini golf, okay? Versus American Ninja Warrior, where you're rooting for them to succeed. Right? Are you rooting for failure, rooting for success? Wipeout, holy moly, you're rooting for failure because it's funny. You take some pleasure in seeing someone else. They're not suffering greatly. They fall into some water. They'll be okay. Right? No great pain has been caused here. Right? If someone slips and falls down, right, and they spill their books everywhere, after you're sure that they're okay physically, then it's probably okay to laugh, right? Unless there's someone who has deeper emotional issues and so forth, and that may be scarring and traumatic, okay? In general, right? Or think about yourself. If you're the one that falls, how quickly you then laugh about it. To give other people permission, okay, it's okay to laugh. Right? This is okay. I'm fine. This was silly. I'm not a robot. I'm a person, therefore sometimes we don't pick up our feet enough when we trip on the stairs, right? Lucretius goes on. Sweetest of all is to dwell in the tranquil temples of the wise, fortified by sound doctrine. That as great as the physical pleasures are, and Epicurus and Lucretius agree, look, physical pleasures are fine. This is good stuff. The tranquility of the mind, it's even better. Right, in the midst of all of this coronavirus stuff, right, we're constantly being reminded, hey, you need to take a few minutes here and there and just breathe, man. Just take 5. Just breathe. Try to get to the tranquil mind thing. Disney Plus now has Zenimations, where it's like 5-minute things, no dialogue, just scenes from particular movies focused on a certain theme like water. And you just watch the water scenes. There's one of them, it's not tranquility, it's serenity. Same idea. There may be some connections here with things like Eastern philosophy and Zen and so on and so forth, and rock gardens and blah, blah, blah. We can talk about more about that if you'd like later. What bitter competition about who's the brightest. Competition's bitter. It puts you against someone else. We're social animals. We should be with one another, not against one another. Talk more about that towards the end of the term when we talk about the distinction between Nietzsche and Russell and the contrast between those two and the meaning of life. What rivalry over rank and status. Ultimately, who cares? Ultimately, quite frankly, it doesn't matter whether you were number 1 in your class graduating high school or number 100 in your class graduating high school. It really doesn't. All those high school superlatives, which is another interesting thing to consider. In those high school superlatives, right? Best hair, best dressed, most likely to be happy? No. Most likely to lead a meaningful life? No. Most likely to have lots of friends? No. Most likely to succeed, be famous, be powerful, be wealthy? And then that makes me wonder, I wonder if those superlatives then are driven by the high school students because that's what 17 and 18-year-olds think the good life is? Or is this driven by the teachers and administrators who have Lucretius and Epicurus are right, are misguided. Perhaps the superlative should be most likely to be a good person, most likely to raise decent children, most likely to say thank you at the grocery store. Just a thought. What furious efforts night and day to reach the summit of wealth and power. And for what? Epicurus and Lucretius would say, wasting your time, distancing yourself from others needlessly. Such attitudes then are truly pitiable. Such feelings, truly blind. That they should use up this tiny span of life in such darkness and danger. Yet all the time, could they but see it, nature is crying out for no more than this: avoid bodily pain, have a mind free from anxiety, and enjoy the pleasures of the senses. Listen to good music, listen to chirping birds, look at pretty flowers, smell flowers. Those ones don't have much of a smell. The simple pleasures of life. Bounce on a trampoline that's in the background back there. There it is. On the other side of the tree. It's plain to see that our bodily nature needs very few things. It's our mind that goes all wonky and crazy and thinks it needs all this other stuff. Overcomplicates life, Epicurus and Lucretius would say. Simplicity. Simplicity leads to tranquility of mind, these guys would say. I like this imagery here on the top of page 766. For by the riverside, stretched out on the soft grass, under the shade of a tall tree, people can relax and enjoy themselves far better without that expense, especially when the weather smiles on them and the spring scatters the green meadow with flowers. There's the life, man. There's the stuff that leads to tranquility of mind. Heck, maybe even, I don't know, taking a nap. Instead of constantly striving this 24/7 connectivity and 24/7, oh, I gotta be better than, I gotta make this sale, and I gotta do this, and I gotta... Productivity. Just leads you to the grave sooner. Treasures, noble birth, regal glory have no beneficial effects at all on our bodies. Right? And in fact, it's kind of the opposite. The depression rate amongst the top 2% socioeconomically in the United States is statistically identical to the depression rate amongst the impoverished. Now, granted, if I'm going to be depressed, I'd rather be depressed and rich than depressed and poor. Right? But there seems to be some research out there which suggests there's kind of this happy middle. You have enough, your bills are paid, you're not worried and anxious and concerned about where the money is coming from, level of stability, but you're also not, oh man, I gotta get the next and the next and the next, and you're not trying to keep up with the Joneses. These have no beneficial effects at all on our bodies, and the next step is to see that they do not benefit our minds either. Because again, we're constantly thinking about, constantly anxious about, constantly worried about. Anxieties pursue us. They're not scared off by the sound of arms and fearsome weapons. They thrive just as much in the company of kings and powerful leaders. They show no respect for the glitter of gold or the glowing splendor of richly colored clothes. Anxiety doesn't go away just because you're rich. Now again, Not impoverished is different. Why doubt then? This is still 766. Why doubt then that the power to banish fear belongs to reason alone? Our life is one long struggle in the darkness. Make note of that phrase. It's going to come up again in Russell at the end of the term. Okay? Struggle in the darkness. And as children in a dark room are terrified of everything, so we in broad daylight are sometimes afraid of things that are no more to be feared than the imaginary horrors that scare children in the dark. This dread, this darkness of the mind must be dispelled, not by the rays of the sun or the bright beams of daylight, but by nature itself, by contemplating its appearance and understanding its workings. Better to know than to not know. The more you understand things, then the less fear there is. Right? We fear the unknown. That's the only thing. Right? The only thing to fear is fear itself. Whatever. The only thing we ever fear is the stuff we don't understand, the stuff we don't know. We don't know the future, therefore we sometimes are anxious and fearful of the future. If you don't know about how planes work, you may be afraid to fly. Right? One of the classic go-to treatment plans for someone who's afraid of flying, go get your pilot's license. The more you understand, the less you will fear. So then Lucretius goes on and look, all this fear of death is nonsense. Because dead is dead, and you're not going to be conscious and aware that you're dead anyway. It's just the end. Done. So why be afraid of it? It's the material basis of everything. We're material things. Fear tinges everything we do with death's blackness. We're so afraid of the meaningful, purposeful life because we know it's going to end. Oh man, what's my legacy going to be? Oh man, when I'm dead, what's going to happen? Oh, maybe I need to be a good person now so that if I die, then I'll be reincarnated as somebody better, or, I'll go to some heavenly place or something along those lines. If I'm a jerk, then maybe I'll end up coming back as a frog or something, or maybe I won't come back. And whoa, man, whoa. Why are you so worried about death? Let's worry about life. The musical Hamilton. I'm all over the place with my references today. The musical Hamilton, when Hamilton meets George Washington, and Washington recognizes in him, this is in the musical, okay, this may or may not have happened in real life, I don't know, but in the musical at least, Hamilton approaches Washington, and Washington sees in Hamilton, look, right, you have a hunger, I appreciate that, right? But you have these visions of dying as a martyr. Let me tell you, dying is easy, young man. Living is harder. Death is easy. Death is easy. Right? Death is easy. Albert Camus, philosopher and novelist, said that the fundamental philosophical question is, why not suicide? Right? If everything is really meaningless, if everything is really that awful, if we're really doing the nihilism thing, then just end it. And we don't, because there's something of value there anyway. There is something of purpose, something of meaning. Fear tinges everything with death's blackness. But it doesn't need to, says Lucretius. Death's just the end. Nothing to be fearful about there. Live life, and when it's over, it's over. Reason teaches this, that the nature of the mind and soul is corporeal, since we see that it moves the limbs, rouses the body from sleep, changes the expression on the face, controls the entire human being. Now, all these things cannot occur without contact. There's no contact except via bodies. So must we not concede that the mind and the soul have a nature that is bodily? What is more, you can see that our mind functions along with our body and shares its sensations. If the grim force of a weapon drives deep into the bones and nerves, even if it is not fatal, it may cause a dizzy fall to the ground, and the mind becomes confused with a feeble desire to get up again. So if bodily weapons and blows can affect it, the mind itself must have a nature that is bodily. Now we'll see in a few weeks, when we turn to Descartes, he'll draw a distinction between mind and body. Heck, even in 2 weeks, when we turn to Plato, we'll see a distinction between mind and body. Lucretius says, no, the mind's a bodily thing. And so just as the body dies, then so will the mind. So you won't be aware of your death. You'll just be dead. The end. Death is nothing to us then on 767. And I won't always read quite this much, but this is just to kind of get us going and to, in some ways, maybe help you to glean out what the important stuff is as we go through these first couple of excerpts. Because again, this is about teaching you not just the discipline of philosophy, not just philosophers, not just how to do philosophy, but also how to read philosophy. Okay? So death is nothing to us, second paragraph, 767, and is wholly irrelevant once we understand that the nature of the mind is mortal. Bottom of the third paragraph. Everyone tries to escape from themselves. Whoa. Whoa. Let's pause and understand the gravity of that statement for a moment. Everyone tries to escape themselves. Now you hear all the time about escapism, right? Try to escape the realities of life. Look at Animal Crossing, right? The game, right? Notice too the things that you do in Animal Crossing. Very mundane, simplistic things. You go fishing, you plant flowers, you decorate your house. All these tranquil and serene things. There's not much rushing around for money. So you're in debt. So what? It's just a game. Who cares? So you sell some things to the shop. Great. Now you have money for clothes. Okay. You donate some stuff to Blathers. Great. Lucretius says it's deeper than that. We don't try to escape the realities of life. We don't try to escape the anxiety. We try to escape ourselves. So I think about the other types of video games, to some extent Animal Crossing, but other video games where you have like an avatar. You have this is who I wish I were. It's not who I truly am, but boy, if I wish I were this instead. My own idealized version of me. Everyone tries to escape from themselves. He goes on. We hate ourselves because we're sick. So that's the other thing with this anxiety. This anxiety then leads to guilt about being anxious about these things. It's like the depression and isolation loop. You're depressed, so you isolate yourself, which then leads to greater depression, more isolation, blah, 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 blah. We hate ourselves because we're sick. It's deep. It is philosophy after all, right? It's supposed to be deep, I suppose. And I wonder if you've ever met someone who is very much like you. Not exactly the same, no two people are exactly the same. Very much like you, or you're very much like them in certain important ways. Does that not cause conflict and tension? There's a Seinfeld episode where he fell for a female who was very much like him. It's like, oh, this is great. I was waiting for me to come along, sweep myself off my feet. This is wonderful. This is love. This is marriage. This is going to be great. And it lasted about a day or two. He was like, this is horrible. I hate myself. I can't stand me. I need someone who's not like me. I mean, opposites attract. There's opposites of people, right? But different attributes or something along those lines. But perhaps there's an aspect of self-loathing that we all have about ourselves. Whoa. Okay. We hate ourselves because we're sick, yet we cannot grasp the cause of our sickness. But if we could see it, we would abandon such frantic activity and first try to understand the nature of the universe. So we'd start with metaphysics before turning to ontology, just like Rand said. Right? Where are we? How can I figure it out? Are prior to, what now should I do? How now should I act? Right? These things are all interrelated. What type of universe is this? Lucretius and Epicurus say a material one. So then what's our place in this nature? A material one. To conclude then, it is this evil and excessive desire for life. Excessive desire for life. Not that a desire for life is bad, but an excessive desire for life Perhaps such an excessive desire, Lucretius would say, that we invent stories about, well, but when you die, you don't really die. There's this other place, or there's this other thing that happens, or because we want to keep living. Some would claim, with regards to biomedical ethics, that some people take excessive measures to stay alive. Ventilators and all this other stuff. Some would claim, not all. Some would claim some of these measures get a bit excessive. Right? The DNR orders and so forth that people now have. Jehovah's Witnesses. It's against their religion to receive a blood transfusion. That to them seems excessive. It's excessive desire for a life that makes us tremble with doubts and foreboding. We don't place it in its proper context, Lucretius says. Mortal beings have a fixed lifespan. Death cannot be avoided, but awaits us all. At least so far. Of course, the medical profession is attempting to defeat that. We'll talk about that next week, immortality. Besides, the setting of our lives remains the same, and continuing to live will not make us able to devise any new pleasures. As long as the thing we crave is absent, it seems more precious than anything. Again, when you're sick, you wish you were well. When you're poor, you wish you were rich. When you're rich, you may wish again for the simple things of life. When you don't have friends, you wish you had friends. When you have too many friends, you wish you didn't have as many friends. When you're stuck at home, you wish you could get out. When you're out, you wish you could come home. Seinfeld's new stand-up routine on Netflix talks about that. There's also something very Buddhist about this as well. Life is suffering. It's the first of the Four Noble Truths. Why is life suffering? The second noble truth? It's suffering because we desire. So the goal then is to not desire, but of course we then have to desire not desiring. As soon as you have the thing, right? As soon as when you're sick, you're like, oh man, if only I was healthy. Then you're healthy, boom, an hour later you're still complaining about other stuff. Oh great, well now I got this and that and the other. Right? I know what'll make me happy will be this external thing, this object that I can acquire. If only I could have a bigger house. If only I could have a nicer car. If only I could have this, the newer iPhone, the newer this, the better this, the faster this. If only, then I'd be happy. Then I'd be happy. Then I'd be happy. It makes it external, dependent upon these circumstances and things out there. Happiness, tranquility of mind, that's a you thing. It's your mind. It's internal. Of course, that's difficult to make that transition from external to internal. You see this in things like ethics, right? Teaching ethics, teaching morality so that it becomes internalized. You see this with things like education itself, right? Rather than external rewards. Oh, hey, you did a great job reading, so here's an external reward. Here's a toy, or something along those lines. Making it, oh, wow, you did a great job reading, and isn't that great that you did a great job reading, right? So that you want to read more. It becomes this internal thing instead of external. It's interesting, too, if you look at workplace surveys, that most employees are willing to get paid a little less money if they feel more valued, if they feel that their voice is heard more. So again, it's not all about the pursuit of money necessarily. It's about something else. Feeling valued, feeling meaningful, feeling like you count and that you matter, that you'd be missed if you weren't there. Interesting. As long as the thing we crave is absent, it seems more precious than anything. If only I could have. But when we get it, we immediately want something else. Every kid the day after their birthday, unless they're Jehovah's Witnesses or something along those lines. Let's presume they get presents, right? They're looking forward to it, the anticipation. Oh man, this is gonna be great. I'm gonna get this and this and this. Oh yeah! Then they get it and they're like, okay. I played with that for a day. Now what's next? Travel. There's been research that indicates traveling works this way too. Vacations. That people are looking forward to the vacation that they have from work. Yes, right. Finally, relief and rest and relaxation, under shade trees and so on and so forth, right? And this is going to be awesome. And then during their vacation, they're complaining it's not as great as they hyped it up to be. But then in retrospect, a few weeks after, they're like, oh yeah, it actually was a really good vacation. It's difficult to be present and enjoy the moment. That's what Lucretius and Epicurus are talking about. Be present, enjoy the moment. Are there things that aren't great about it? Probably. Are there things that are great about it? Also probably. Our mouths are always gaping open with a constant thirst for life. And a thirst for something else. So now the big question then, and this will probably be the discussion question as well. And so I don't know, I didn't point this out before, at the end of each section of text, at the end of each part, right? So the human life and its meaning part, page 820, is a list of 12 questions. There's one question for each of the 12 excerpts. And these are Cottingham questions. But the first one here for Lucretius is a good one. Do you find the Epicurean argument that we have nothing to fear in death convincing? Right, you read this and you're like, that anxiety is now gone. Whew, what a relief. Or you like, even if he's right, so what? I'm still freaked out by it. I don't want to die. I don't know. Alright, so that's probably enough for this video. And so in the next video then, still today, Tuesday part 2, still today, will be Seneca and Augustine, and see where they share similarities and where maybe they differ from Lucretius and Epicurus as far as the meaning of life.